Have you ever met someone whose presence shifted the entire atmosphere before they even said a word? Not because they were the most attractive person in the room, not because they were louder, smarter, or more polished, but because something in them felt undeniable. Their energy didn't ask for permission. It didn't chase attention. It didn't try to impress. It simply existed with a kind of quiet certainty that everyone around them could feel, even if they couldn't explain it. So what is that? Because most people spend years trying to reverse engineer it from the outside. They study body language, eye contact, tone of voice, social dynamics. They try to learn magnetism as if it were a skill. But that's the first illusion. Real magnetism does not begin in how you look or how you act. It begins in something far less visible and far more powerful. It begins in the relationship you have with yourself. And this is where everything changes. Because the moment you try to become magnetic in order to be chosen, desired, validated, you collapse the very energy that creates it. Why? Because need has a frequency. And whether people can articulate it or not, they feel it. There is a profound energetic difference between someone who is trying to be chosen and someone who already feels whole. That difference is everything. The most magnetic people are not asking, "How do I make them notice me?" They're not calculating their value in real time. They're moving through life from a deeper center, a place where their worth is no longer up for negotiation. And when you begin to understand what creates that internal state, you arrive at a realization that is both unsettling and liberating. What if magnetism isn't something you build, but something that naturally emerges? The moment you stop abandoning yourself? What if the way people respond to you has already been decided before you even open your mouth? There is a field you carry, subtle, invisible, but constantly active. It is not something mystical in the abstract sense. It is measurable in the way your nervous system regulates, in the coherence between your thoughts and emotions, in the signals your body transmits without your awareness. And this field is always communicating. In quantum physics, the observer is never separate from the observed. Your state influences the outcome, not symbolically, but functionally. The same principle applies here. People are not just reacting to your words, they are responding to your state. This is where most interpretations of the law of attraction fall apart, because it is not about repeating affirmations or forcing positive thoughts. It is about alignment. The consistency between what you think, what you feel, and what you believe to be true about yourself. And more importantly, what you embody when no one is watching. Ask yourself honestly, when you walk into a room, are you grounded, or are you subtly scanning for approval? Are you present, or are you adjusting yourself in real time to be accepted? Because that internal movement, however small, creates instability in your energy, and instability repels. But when you reach a state where you are genuinely okay either way, whether someone stays or leaves, approves or rejects, responds or ignores, you enter a completely different frequency. One that does not grasp. One that does not chase. This is not detachment. It is self-sufficiency at an emotional level. And paradoxically, this is where attraction begins. Because the moment you no longer need the external world to confirm your value, the external world starts responding to you differently. If this is already shifting your perspective, subscribe and like the video so you don't miss what's coming next. What if the real shift isn't becoming confident, but becoming independent from outcomes? Most people think magnetism comes from confidence. But look closely, what they often call confidence is still conditional. It rises when things go well and collapses the moment something doesn't go as expected. That's not power. That's dependence disguised. True magnetism begins at a much deeper level. It begins the moment you stop tying your internal state to external results. This is what creates the energy of, I'm good either way. Not as a phrase you repeat, but as a state you embody. Because think about it, how much of your behavior is subtly shaped by outcomes? The way you speak, the way you text, the way you show up. How often are you calibrating yourself based on how something might be received? That constant adjustment creates tension. And tension is felt. It signals uncertainty. It signals that something is being negotiated internally. And the moment you are negotiating your worth in real time, you are no longer anchored in yourself. But when you shift into a state where your well-being is no longer dependent on how things unfold, something changes instantly. Your energy stabilizes. You stop overanalyzing. You stop performing. You stop trying to control the moment. And here's the paradox. When you no longer need a specific outcome, you become far more effective in creating it.
Why?
Because your actions are no longer distorted by fear. This is where the law of attraction becomes real, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. You are no longer pushing reality. You are no longer forcing alignment. You are allowing it because internally you are already aligned. And that is the beginning of a presence that cannot be ignored. What if the highest level of magnetism isn't even I'm good either way, but something far beyond that? At first, becoming independent from outcomes feels like freedom. You stop chasing, you stop clinging, you stop needing things to go a certain way. But if you look closely, there is still a subtle structure underneath. You are still labeling experiences as good or bad. You've just learned not to depend on them. And this is where the deeper shift begins. Because as long as you are dividing reality into what you prefer and what you resist, there is still friction in your field. There is still a part of you trying to move life in a specific direction. And that effort, no matter how refined, creates a subtle tension. Now, imagine something different. Imagine relating to life without immediately categorizing every moment. Without deciding, this is good, I want more, or this is bad, I need to fix or avoid it. Instead, you meet reality as it is, fully, openly, without resistance. This is not passivity. It is coherence. In quantum terms, resistance introduces noise into the system. It fragments your signal. But acceptance, true, non-performative acceptance, creates clarity. Your energy becomes undistorted because you are no longer pushing against what is already happening. And paradoxically, this is where your influence becomes strongest. Because when you are not resisting reality, you are no longer reacting to it. You are relating to it from a place of neutrality. And neutrality is not emptiness. It is power without distortion. This is the state where magnetism becomes effortless. You are no longer trying to create a specific version of reality, and yet, reality begins to organize itself differently around you. If acceptance is so powerful, why do so many people resist letting go of control? Because control feels like safety. On the surface, it looks like strength. It looks like being proactive, intentional, in charge of your life. But if you look deeper, most control is not coming from clarity, it is coming from fear. Fear of losing something. Fear of not getting what you want. Fear of being seen, rejected, or misunderstood. And that fear has a very specific energetic signature. It tightens your body. It narrows your perception. It makes your actions rigid, calculated, and reactive. You may not notice it consciously, but others do, instantly. Because when you try to control how someone sees you, how a situation unfolds, or how an outcome should happen, you stop being present. You split your attention between the moment and the version of the moment you are trying to create. That split weakens your field. In quantum terms, it introduces interference. Instead of a coherent signal, you are broadcasting contradiction. Part of you is here, and part of you is resisting what is here. And that internal conflict is felt as pressure. Now contrast that with someone who is not trying to control anything. They are fully in the moment. Their attention is undivided. Their energy is open, responsive, and fluid. There is no tension behind their actions, only presence. And presence is magnetic. The irony is almost invisible. The more you try to control the experience, the less influence you actually have over it. But the moment you release that grip, your energy expands, your perception sharpens, and your impact deepens. Because true power is not in controlling reality. It is in being so aligned within yourself that reality no longer needs to be forced. What if the very things you've been trying to hide are the exact source of your magnetism? Most people spend their lives managing an internal narrative. This part of me is acceptable, this part is not. They polish what they believe will be admired and conceal what they fear will be judged. In doing so, they create a constant low-level tension, a quiet effort to maintain an image. And that effort is felt because suppression has a frequency. It fragments your energy. It creates micro-hesitations in your voice, subtle contractions in your body, a slight disconnection in your presence. Even if no one can name it, they sense that something is being held back. Now consider the opposite. What happens when someone is no longer at war with themselves? When they stop trying to eliminate their imperfections and instead integrate them. In psychological terms, this is shadow integration, the process of bringing rejected parts of the self into conscious awareness without judgment. And in energetic terms, it creates coherence. There is no longer a split between who you are and who you are trying to appear to be. That coherence is powerful because when you own your insecurities without collapsing into them, they lose their charge. There is no longer anything to defend, nothing to prove, nothing to hide. And in that absence of internal conflict, your presence becomes grounded, real, and undeniably compelling. This is why authenticity is not a performance, it is the result of removing resistance. And here is the paradox most people miss. The traits you believe make you less attractive often become the very things that make you unforgettable, but only when you stop trying to conceal them. If authenticity is so powerful, why do so many people still try to fit in? Because fitting in feels safe. From an early age, you learned, consciously or not, that being accepted meant adapting. You adjusted your tone, your opinions, your behavior, even your identity. Not because it was natural, but because it increased your chances of being liked, included, or approved of. And over time, that adaptation became automatic. You stopped asking, "What feels true to me?" and started asking, "What will be well received?" This is where magnetism begins to fade. Because every time you override your natural expression to match an external expectation, you create a subtle internal disconnect, a gap between who you are and who you present. And that gap weakens your energy. It makes your presence less defined, less grounded, less real. People may still like you, but they won't feel you. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine someone who is no longer calibrating themselves to be accepted. Someone who expresses what they genuinely think, feel, and are, without filtering it through the lens of approval. Not aggressively, not defensively, just cleanly. There is a clarity in that. In physics, coherence amplifies signal strength. And the same principle applies here. When your internal state and your external expression are aligned, your presence becomes stronger, more distinct, more noticeable. This is why trying to fit in makes you invisible. And stepping into your natural expression, even if it's not universally liked, makes you stand out effortlessly. Because magnetism is not about being accepted by everyone. It is about being unmistakably yourself. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to lose their presence the moment they admire someone too much? It's subtle, but unmistakable. At first, they're grounded, relaxed, natural. But the moment they place someone on a pedestal, something shifts. Their tone changes. Their posture tightens. Their words become more filtered, more careful. They begin to perform instead of simply being. Why does that happen? Because the moment you elevate someone above you, you unconsciously diminish yourself. You create a psychological hierarchy where the other person becomes the source of value, and you become the one trying to earn it. And that shift doesn't stay in your mind. It reshapes your entire energetic field. In that moment, your attention is no longer rooted in yourself. It is projected outward. You begin to monitor their reactions. You adjust your behavior to maintain their interest. You start seeking subtle signs of approval. And that creates distance. Not physical distance, but energetic distance. Because magnetism requires presence. And presence requires you to remain connected to yourself. The moment your focus becomes dependent on how someone else perceives you, that connection weakens. Now here's the paradox. The more you value someone while staying rooted in your own center, the more natural and balanced the interaction becomes. But the moment admiration turns into idealization, you lose your position. And when you lose your position, you lose your pull. This is why pedestal dynamics quietly dissolve attraction. Not because admiration is wrong, but because losing yourself in it is. True magnetism is not built by placing others above you, but by meeting them as equals, without abandoning your own ground. What is it that people actually feel when they sense neediness, and why does it instantly reduce attraction? It's not the action itself. It's not texting first, showing interest, or expressing emotion. Those things are neutral. What people feel is something deeper, a subtle pressure behind the behavior. An invisible expectation. A quiet demand for a specific response. That pressure is the signal. Neediness is not about wanting connection. It is about depending on the response to regulate how you feel about yourself. And the moment your emotional state becomes contingent on someone else's reaction, your energy begins to contract. You start seeking confirmation. You start overinterpreting signals. You start adjusting yourself to maintain engagement. And all of that creates instability. In energetic terms, your field becomes inconsistent. You are no longer centered. You are fluctuating. And that fluctuation is felt as tension, even if nothing obvious is being said. Now consider the opposite. Imagine expressing interest without needing it to be returned, showing up fully without monitoring the outcome, engaging without trying to secure something in exchange. There is no pressure in that, no hidden agenda, no emotional dependency. And that absence of pressure is what creates ease. It allows the other person to move toward you naturally, without resistance. Because attraction does not grow under pressure, it expands in space. This is the distinction most people miss. It's not your actions that push people away. It's the energy behind them. And the moment you remove the need for a specific outcome, your presence becomes lighter, freer, and infinitely more magnetic. If neediness creates pressure, then what is people-pleasing really doing beneath the surface? At first glance, it looks like kindness. You're attentive. You're agreeable. You anticipate what others want and try to meet it before they even ask. You avoid conflict, soften your opinions, and adjust your behavior to maintain harmony. And for a moment, it works. You're liked, accepted, appreciated. But look closer, because beneath that behavior, there is often an unspoken contract. If I make you comfortable, you will accept me. That is not generosity. That is negotiation. People-pleasing is not an expression of fullness. It is an attempt to secure connection by managing how others feel. And while it may appear selfless on the surface, energetically it carries the same signal as neediness, a subtle dependence on external validation. And that signal is felt. Not consciously, perhaps, but something in the interaction begins to feel less grounded, less real. Because when you are constantly adapting to maintain approval, your presence becomes unstable. There is no clear center, only a shifting version of you, shaped by the moment. Now imagine the alternative. You are kind, but not compliant, open, but not self-abandoning, respectful, but not self-erasing. There is a firmness in that, not rigidity, but clarity. In psychological terms, this is the transition from approval-seeking to self-trust. And in energetic terms, it restores coherence. You are no longer splitting yourself to be accepted. You are expressing from a stable internal position. And that stability changes everything. Because people don't deeply connect with the version of you that adapts to them. They connect with the version of you that remains intact, even in their presence. Where does this need to please, to adjust, to be accepted actually come from? It didn't start in your adult life. It was learned much earlier, at a time when connection was not just emotional, but essential for survival. As a child, you were constantly reading the environment, sensing what brought closeness and what created distance. You noticed what was rewarded, what was rejected, what was safe, and what wasn't. And slowly, without realizing it, you adapted. Maybe you learned to be agreeable to avoid conflict. Maybe you became easy, so you wouldn't be a burden. Maybe you suppressed certain emotions because they weren't welcomed. Not because something was wrong with you, but because your system was intelligent. It was trying to secure love, safety, and belonging with the tools it had. But here's what most people never revisit. Those strategies don't disappear. They become patterns. They follow you into adulthood, shaping how you relate, how you express yourself, how you seek connection. And what once protected you begins to limit you. Because now, instead of responding freely, you are reacting from a conditioned identity. You are not asking, what do I truly feel? You are asking, what version of me will be accepted here? And that question quietly disconnects you from yourself. In nervous system terms, this is a form of emotional conditioning. Your body associates authenticity with risk and adaptation with safety. So even when there is no real threat, the pattern continues. But magnetism cannot exist inside that pattern, because magnetism requires presence, and presence requires you to feel safe being fully yourself, which means the real shift is not learning new behaviors. It is recognizing the old ones and no longer letting them define you. What happens the moment you stop adapting and start expressing? At first, it can feel uncomfortable, almost disorienting, because for so long, your attention has been directed outward. You've been reading people, anticipating reactions, adjusting yourself in subtle ways to maintain connection. That pattern becomes so automatic that you barely notice it. So when you interrupt it, there's a pause, a moment where you are no longer performing, but you're not yet fully anchored in your natural expression either. And in that space, something unfamiliar appears, uncertainty. But this is not regression. This is the beginning of alignment, because for the first time, your energy is no longer being shaped by external feedback in real time. It is starting to reorganize from within. And that internal reorganization creates a different kind of presence, one that is less reactive, more grounded. Now, imagine continuing in that direction. You speak what you genuinely think, without rehearsing it internally first. You express what you feel without filtering it for approval. You allow your personality to emerge without trying to manage how it will be received. There is a rawness in that, but also a clarity. And that clarity is what makes people pay attention. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. In energetic terms, expression without self-censorship creates a coherent signal. There is no delay, no distortion, no internal negotiation. And that coherence amplifies your presence in a way that cannot be replicated by strategy. This is where vulnerability becomes powerful, not as exposure, but as congruence. Because when you are no longer hiding behind adaptation, there is finally nothing standing between who you are and how you are experienced. If you're no longer chasing approval, no longer controlling outcomes, what actually sustains your presence? This is where many people feel a kind of emptiness at first, because so much of their behavior was previously driven by reaction, by trying to be liked, to be understood, to be chosen, to make something happen. When those drivers begin to dissolve, there is a quiet space that opens up. And the question becomes, what now? This is where magnetism either stabilizes or collapses. Because if you don't replace those external drivers with something internal, your energy can become passive instead of grounded. You may stop chasing, but you also stop moving with direction. True magnetism is not just the absence of need. It is the presence of purpose. Not in the sense of a fixed goal or identity, but as a deeper orientation. A sense that your energy is moving somewhere, even when nothing external is happening. That your attention is engaged in something meaningful, not because it impresses others, but because it feels aligned with who you are. In psychological terms, this creates internal anchoring. In energetic terms, it stabilizes your field. Because when you are connected to something beyond immediate validation, your presence stops fluctuating based on interaction. You are not entering a room to get something, you are bringing something. And that changes everything. Your attention becomes selective. Your time becomes intentional. Your interactions become grounded in choice, not impulse. This is why people with purpose feel different. Not because they are trying to stand out, but because their energy is already directed, already engaged, already fulfilled in motion. And when your energy is not looking for something to complete it, it becomes something others naturally move toward. If purpose stabilizes your energy, what keeps it from collapsing under pressure? Because it's one thing to feel aligned when everything is calm. It's another to remain grounded when something challenges you, when someone pulls away, when expectations break, when uncertainty appears. This is where most people lose their center. Not because they don't understand the principles, but because their nervous system is still wired to react. The moment something feels like rejection, loss, or instability, the body activates old patterns. Overthinking, chasing, withdrawing, controlling. And suddenly the alignment is gone. So the real question becomes, can you stay connected to yourself, even when your environment is not confirming you? This is where emotional regulation becomes essential. Not suppression. Not pretending to be unaffected, but the ability to feel an emotion without being consumed by it. In neuroscience, this is the difference between reactivity and response. Reactivity is automatic. It pulls you into the pattern before you even realize it. Response, on the other hand, creates space. It allows you to experience the emotion without losing your position. And that space is where magnetism is either maintained or lost. Because when you react from fear, your energy contracts. You become predictable, grasping, unstable. But when you can remain present with the emotion, without letting it dictate your behavior, your energy stays intact. There is a steadiness in that, a kind of internal resilience that signals something powerful. You are not easily destabilized, and that changes how people perceive you, not because you're trying to appear strong, but because you no longer collapse under pressure. And that is a level of magnetism that cannot be faked, only embodied. What happens when you stop reacting and start choosing your response in real time? At first, it feels almost unnatural, because most reactions are instantaneous. Someone says something, and you feel the urge to defend, explain, adjust, or withdraw, before you've even had a moment to observe what's happening inside you. It's automatic, fast, conditioned. But when you begin to interrupt that pattern, even slightly, something powerful emerges. A gap. A space between the stimulus and your response. And inside that space, everything becomes possible. Because for the first time, you are no longer acting from the past. You are not repeating a learned reaction, shaped by old experiences or emotional memory. You are present, aware, choosing. In neuroscience, this is where higher-order processing overrides automatic survival responses. But beyond the science, there is a deeper shift happening. You are reclaiming authorship over your behavior, and that changes your entire energetic field. Instead of reacting impulsively, you pause. Instead of over-explaining, you observe. Instead of chasing, you allow. And in that pause, your energy stabilizes. There is no rush, no urgency, no need to resolve the moment immediately. This creates a sense of calm authority, not because you are controlling the situation, but because you are no longer controlled by it. And people feel that. They sense that you are not easily pulled out of yourself, that your presence is not dependent on external triggers, that you can remain grounded even when something unexpected happens. This is where magnetism becomes precise, not loud, not forceful, but deliberate. Because when your responses are no longer automatic, your presence becomes intentional. And intention, when it is embodied, has a gravity that draws attention without effort. What if the real shift isn't in how others see you, but in how you stop seeing yourself through their eyes? This is one of the most subtle patterns, and one of the most limiting. Even when you are no longer seeking approval directly, there can still be a quiet habit of self-observation through imagined perspectives. You replay conversations. You anticipate judgments. You adjust internally based on how you think you were perceived. And in doing so, you split your awareness. Part of you is living the experience, and part of you is watching yourself from the outside. That division weakens your presence, because instead of being fully engaged in the moment, your attention is fragmented. You are monitoring yourself instead of inhabiting yourself. And that creates a kind of energetic distance, not just between you and others, but within you. Now imagine releasing that habit, not by forcing confidence, but by withdrawing your attention from imagined evaluations, by no longer rehearsing how you appear, and instead returning to how you feel, what you think, what is actually happening. There is a simplicity in that. You speak because something is true, not because it will be received well. You act because it feels aligned, not because it will be approved. In cognitive terms, this reduces self-referential processing. In energetic terms, it restores coherence, because your attention is no longer split across multiple imagined realities. It is fully anchored in the present, and that anchoring creates depth. People sense that you are not performing for an audience, even an invisible one, that you are not shaping yourself to be interpreted. You are simply there. And that presence, free from self-surveillance, has a quiet intensity. Because when you stop seeing yourself through others' eyes, you finally begin to experience yourself directly. And that changes everything. What happens when you no longer try to be understood, but focus on being clear with yourself? Most people spend an enormous amount of energy trying to manage perception. They explain more than necessary, justify their choices, soften their words, or over-communicate, hoping to eliminate misunderstanding. But beneath that effort, there is often a hidden fear. If they don't understand me, I might lose connection. So they compensate. They clarify again. They adjust their tone. They reshape their message in real time. And without realizing it, they begin to dilute their own expression. Because the more you try to control how you are interpreted, the less precise your signal becomes. You start speaking not from clarity, but from anticipation. And anticipation fragments your energy. Now consider a different approach. You focus on being internally clear before you speak. You express what is true for you, without over-editing it for approval. You allow space for the other person to interpret, respond, or even misunderstand. At first, this can feel risky, because you are no longer managing the outcome. You are not trying to guarantee that the message lands perfectly. But what you gain is something far more powerful: integrity of expression. In communication theory, clarity increases signal strength, and in energetic terms, it creates coherence. There is no excess noise, no overcompensation, no hidden agenda. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say. And that precision carries weight. People may not always agree. They may not always respond as expected, but they will feel the difference, because you are no longer trying to be understood at any cost. You are rooted in understanding yourself first, and that makes your presence sharper, cleaner, and undeniably magnetic. What if the final shift isn't about becoming more, but about needing less? By now, you've seen how magnetism is not built through performance, control, or approval. It emerges when you stabilize your internal state, express without distortion, and remain grounded regardless of external response. But there is one layer even deeper than all of this. It is the moment you no longer need the experience to complete you, not the person, not the outcome, not the validation, nothing. Because as long as there is something you need from the moment, your energy is still reaching outward, still negotiating, still subtly asking reality to give you something in order to feel whole. And that movement, however refined, creates dependency. Now imagine the opposite. You enter an interaction already complete. You engage without needing to gain anything. You allow the moment to unfold without assigning it the role of defining your worth. There is a profound stillness in that. Not emptiness, but fullness. In quantum terms, this is a closed system. Your energy is not leaking, not seeking, not fragmenting. It is self-contained, coherent, stable. And that stability creates a kind of gravity. Because people are naturally drawn to what does not need them, not in a cold or distant way, but in a way that feels grounded, safe, and real. There is no pressure to perform, no expectation to fulfill, just presence. This is what makes someone dangerously magnetic. Not because they are trying to attract, but because they are no longer trying to complete themselves through others. And in that state, something remarkable happens. They become the one others are drawn to without ever needing to pull. If you no longer need anything from the moment, what naturally begins to guide your actions? This is where many people hesitate. Because when you remove need, control, and external validation, it can feel like there is nothing left to drive you. No urgency, no pressure, no clear incentive to act. But what emerges in that space is far more powerful than any external motivator. Clarity, not forced, not constructed, but felt. When your mind is no longer occupied with managing outcomes or securing approval, your perception sharpens. You begin to notice what actually resonates, what feels aligned, what draws your attention naturally without effort. And that becomes your compass. Instead of asking, "What should I do to get a result?" you begin asking, "What feels true to move toward right now?" This is not impulsiveness. It is attunement. In neuroscience, this reflects a shift from fear-based decision-making to intuitive processing, where the body and mind operate in coherence rather than conflict. And in energetic terms, it aligns your actions with your internal state, creating a seamless flow between intention and movement. You act, not to achieve, but to express. You choose, not to secure, but to align. And because there is no underlying need, your actions carry no pressure. They are clean, direct, and unforced. This is where flow becomes natural. You move through conversations, opportunities, and decisions without overthinking because you are no longer filtering everything through fear or expectation. And people feel that. They sense that your actions are not calculated. They are precise because they are aligned. And that alignment creates a kind of effortless authority, the kind that doesn't seek control but naturally influences everything it touches. What if everything you've been searching for in others was never meant to come from them in the first place? This is the final shift, the one that quietly redefines everything. Because at the core of all seeking, approval, attention, validation, connection, there is a deeper desire to feel complete, to feel seen, chosen, secure, enough. And for most people, that feeling is outsourced. It is placed in outcomes, in relationships, in how they are perceived. But that creates a fragile system. Because the moment the external changes, the internal collapses. Now, imagine something different. Imagine no longer assigning anyone the role of completing you. No longer asking the moment to confirm your worth. No longer depending on anything outside of you to stabilize how you feel. Not as an idea, but as a lived state. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost too quiet. Because the constant seeking that once filled your attention is no longer there. But in that absence, something deeper begins to surface. A sense of internal sufficiency. You are not waiting. You are not lacking. You are not trying to become enough. You already are. And from that state, everything changes. Your interactions become cleaner because there is no hidden need behind them. Your presence becomes stronger because it is not fluctuating based on response. Your energy becomes attractive because it is no longer reaching outward. This is what it means to be dangerously magnetic. Not someone who pulls others in through effort, but someone who stands so fully in their own completeness that others are naturally drawn into their field. And in that moment, the question is no longer, how do I attract? It becomes something far more powerful. What do I choose now that I no longer need to? If something in this video shifted the way you see yourself, stay with that. Because this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you are without the noise. If you want more content that challenges how you think, feel, and show up in the world, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Like this video if it resonated with you, and share it with someone who is ready to stop chasing and start becoming.